Welcome back. This is chapter 28, section 1. This is going to be the introduction to the arthropods. This is the phylum Arthropoda, and you are going to be amazed at the diversity and the numbers that are involved with this particular group of organisms. These are animals, they are invertebrates, and so they do not have a skeleton. So each one of these and what you see through these slides, they do not have a vertebral column, they don't have a skeleton, they only have an exoskeleton, which we'll talk about later. The diversity of the arthropods is just remarkable. I could just spend literally we could dedicate full classes, full years of study to the arthropods. They are so diverse and so numerous, you just couldn't possibly get to all of it. And so we'll touch on some main features here in chapter 28, but we're not going to be able to get to all of it. I will end up spending a lot of time on these three organisms at the bottom in class mostly, because these are my favorite organisms in any group that we have. So flowering plants are some of my favorites, of course, you know that, but then aside from that, the termites, the ants, and the bees are my favorite organism. One of the reasons are, and you'll see in section 3, they're all social organisms, and so they have these complex societies and such. And so we'll talk about that. They're remarkable. I think you'll be fascinated by listening to some of the information in these three groups of organisms here. So here, section 1 shouldn't be too long, so we'll get to it, and it should go by pretty quickly for section 1. We're just introducing the arthropods. So here's just some pictures to show you the diversity within arthropods, and this doesn't even show you all of it, but just so you can see, oh wow, you know, all sorts of different body plans and all sorts of things. So up here we have a millipede, a praying mantis, hermit crab is in the arthropods, the tarantulas and spiders, mites, and lice and termites and all sorts of things, dragonflies, beetles, butterflies, here's a carpenter bee, a sea star. These are all part of the arthropods, and you'll see why. They're all related, and they're all considered part of this phylum Arthropoda. And so here's some important vocabulary. Remember to take notes and make sure to define these different terms. Here's our key concepts. And so the majority of species, we'll talk more next time, but Arthropoda is unbelievably diverse. And the majority of species that scientists have described to date, remember we've described near 2 million species on Earth, and that includes, you know, fungi and plants and mammals and all sorts of things. The majority is within this phylum Arthropoda. We're talking about near 1 million species described, and that is not even close to the amount that are in this phylum. We just haven't gotten to them all. And so so it's quite diverse, quite numerous, and just an amazing phylum. Arthropods have, this is a very important, this is the main features of arthropods. This is what sort of brings them all together. Arthropods have a segmented body. They have a tough exoskeleton. Okay, so they don't have an internal skeleton. Instead, it's on the outside. And they have jointed appendages. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So first, the exoskeleton. One of the most interesting things about the arthropods is that they have this thing called an exoskeleton, and this is just a tough external covering, and we call it an exoskeleton. And it's made of a protein. They secrete a protein that creates this, and this is called chitin. And so chitin is what they secrete to create this exoskeleton. And it acts very much like a suit of armor, protects them, and as they grow and develop, they're going to have to shed this, and we'll talk about that in a second. But this whole this has nothing in it any longer. This is just the exoskeleton, okay, and it's composed of this chitin. The organism has already left, and we'll talk about why it does that and such in just a second. So this is considered a molt, but this is just the exoskeleton that you're seeing right here of the arthropod. As you see here, this is just a diagram. You don't have to memorize all these terms, don't worry. But as you can see, as we've gone through the invertebrates, as we've gone through the animals, we're seeing an increasing of specialization of tissues. We're seeing an increase of complexity. So that's what you see here. You can see now, although it doesn't have as complex and advanced a brain as our mollusks and our cephalopod, it does have a more complex specialized nervous system, and it has compound eyes. Even some have simple eyes, antennae, has a more complex digestive tract down the middle through here. It has a circulatory system with primitive heart type structures. It has a respiratory system that goes throughout the body plan. It has a more complex reproductive system. And so we're increasing, it has wings, and it's increasing in complexity, it's increasing in the specialization of these tissues that you see here. And so we'll talk about some of these, but we're not going to be able to talk about all of these different parts of arthropods. Remember, it has a segmented body, so we have the head segment, thorax, and abdomen. So it has different segments. It also has appendages that are jointed, and so that's what you see here. Here's an appendage, and you can see that there's these clear sections, and that's the different joints of the appendage. Oops. So how do they feed? Well, there's some that are herbivores, some are carnivores, some are omnivores, and some are parasites. So there's a diversity in the way that they feed, and different arthropods do different things. Response. So most arthropods have a well-developed nervous system. This is why it's hard to swat a fly and capture insects and different arthropods. It's because, well, they have a developed nervous system. They're able to respond to stimuli very quickly. And so although their brains aren't as developed as the mollusk, they're not going to be able to reason or learn things. They do have the ability to respond to stimuli and such. So they also have well-developed and sophisticated sense organs. This includes both their compound eye, okay, to detect color and motion, but also things like the antenna to read pheromones, chemical signals that get to them. They have senses in their mouth parts and in their feet for both tasting and also communicating with each other. It's very developed sense organs they have. Molting. So this is a very important key concept here, and this is what you're seeing here is the arthropod is molting. So this is a scorpion, and what happens is they outgrow their exoskeleton. Sort of like when you're growing up, you outgrow your clothes, which is an external sort of layer. That's the same thing that happens here. As arthropods get larger, they outgrow their exoskeleton, and they have to get rid of it and create a new one. So this is called molting. This is the molt. Okay, this is their old exoskeleton, and then this is the organism. It's alive and well, in fact, probably better off. It's going to be a little bit larger, and for a time it's going to be a little vulnerable because it takes a little bit of time for that chitin, the new exoskeleton, to harden and be ready to function properly. And so molting is very important to arthropods, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. Here's the questions. So that's the section, and that's section 1, and here's the questions. Talk to you next.